Welcome everybody to our Nomasis webinar. My name is Nadine and I'm pleased to introduce to you Mathieu Devaux. Mathieu is Mobile Security Engineer at Nomasis and will be presenting today. Today's webinar is about conditional access. The session lasts about 30 minutes. Please notice that during the presentation, your microphones will be set to mute. You may post questions during the session through the chat function or ask them at the end of the presentation. The questions will then be answered by Mathieu. Now I'd like to hand over to Mathieu. Please, Mathieu.
Thank you very much, Nadine. Welcome, everyone. So today I'm going to speak a little bit about conditional access. So the idea is that I will start with the context of what is conditional access, where does it stand in our own context today. Also, conditional access is not a new topic. It's kind of a concept that is here since a long time. So I would like to introduce about what is the legacy conditional access that we all know today. And also, the biggest point will be to discuss how does conditional access has evolved and what it is today. And I will also present to you some use cases to see what we can do with this concept and with this technology. And finally, maybe the most important part, how to plan your conditional access and how to make it the easiest way possible in your own company. So I will start with some easy statement. I think we all agree that we have users and they all need to have access to the corporate resources. And as companies, we need to protect those corporate resources. We are all aware of the firewall-based network, but today we can also say that our modern security perimeter is now extending beyond just this firewall. And we have now to deal with cloud applications, with nomad users working from everywhere. So the topic has a bit changed today. But as I told you, conditional access, it's not really new. The concept itself is basically just an if-then statement. So if a user wants to access a resource, then they must validate a condition. And what we all do today is having a trusted network, which is the only condition. So if the user is in the trusted network, then the data are accessible. If no, then the data are not accessible. Problem is that it's not enough today. As I talk about the cloud application, we cannot protect anything that is outside the firewall-based perimeter. So we can see that this is not enough anymore. And also, it's a bit tricky with all the mobile users. We are all used to using VPN, but most of them have disadvantages in security flows, and they are not always practical. And one of the most important points is that internal threats are really dangerous. And most of the time when we see security audit, you can see that the company get breached because someone could find a way inside the company. And once you're inside, you can almost access anything. You can sniff the network. You can find hashes password going through the network. And most of the time, the servers are not up to date. So it's a big topic. So today, conditional access has a bit evolved. It has grew with all this cloud application that we have and that we have to deal with. So basically, what we did is simply to add more signals or add more conditions. So we saw that the basic condition was to be inside the trusted network. So instead of having only one condition like this, we will use many signals and many conditions to verify every access. So what is important to understand is that we don't really protect the network now, we protect the data directly. So we will protect every access and check every access to any data to see if all the conditions are validated. So this is mainly the conditional access technology from Microsoft that we see here. So as I told you, the conditional access is a concept, but it's also a product from a lot of company. So here we are seeing the one that is built in the Azure part of Microsoft with Intune. And or their solution, they use main signals as the user. So who is the user? Where does the user is? So the location. Also the device that is connecting with. If the device is compliant, how does it stand? And also you can check any application. You can select if only this application can access a resource. So it's pretty useful. And finally, you can also have real-time risk if you use some external component to see if a user has, for example, his password leaked. And when you have all those signals together, you will check every access and select if you want to allow, if you want to block, or if you want to allow but require multi-factor authentication, or if you want to limit access by only a few restrictions. So there is a lot of granularity that you can have here. And finally, at the end, you have access to the apps and the data at the end of the rope. As I told you, I described the most common signals. So the user one or the group users are those which we are used to. We mainly select what kind of AAD groups can access the data that we want, and you can use fine-grained control to choose that. And the location part, you can choose if you want to select IP or if you want to select countries directly. You can, for example, say that every people in Switzerland can access the data, but nothing else. Or you can choose some trusted IP that are only your own network to say that for this kind of IP, you will have a different set of rules. So for example, you don't require MFA if you are inside, but you require it if you are outside. So those are all the signals that are used mainly. And then one that we all use also a lot today with MDM is the device. So that's what we do also if the device is compliant, if it's a specific platform. For example, you only allow iOS or Android. And you can check if they have a passcode that is inside the device, so the device is compliant or not. So that's also very useful to use. And as I told you, you can use application. So one good example is, for example, to say only Outlook can access the Exchange Online server. Any other app will be blocked. So this is one good example. And the real-time and calculated risk detection, this one is using the third party, another part of the AAD, which is the identity protections. And this one will help you to check more information about the user, if the user have a risky signing behavior. So as I told you, we can, for example, know that the users have the password that has been leaked on the website that we know. And you can say from these signals, okay, we know that the user have a high risk of being compromised, so we will apply those rules. So those are the most common signals. And then we will decide if we block or grant. And you have multiple options for the granting of access, and you can let access only, but with a multi-factor authentication, so like SMS or a token, this kind of technology. You can require the access only if the device is compliant or if it's AD joined. And you can also require approved app or the app protection policy, which are Intune specific technology. So when we speak about conditional access, there is mainly two components, two high-level components. We have the assignments and the access controls. So that's what we talked about. The assignments are the who, the what, and the where of the conditional access. And the access controls us what do we do to control the access. And those both components make the policies. So the conditional access policies are based on assignments and access controls. So as I told you, the who is simply the user and groups. You can include or exclude people. You can include all users and exclude a few specific groups. You can choose by directory roles, or you can also select external guest users. So you can specify a lot of different rules based on the who. And the what is basically the cloud apps or the actions that you want to allow or not. As I told you, for example, with Exchange Online, this would be one of the cloud apps that we protect. And the where is where we use the location or the device platform, the risk, etc. Okay, so I would like now to present some use case that I think are useful. And the first one would be the risk base. So this one will use what I showed you before with the identity protection. This requires a P2 license, just that you are aware. But if you have this, you can then detect a lot of different actions from risky behavior. And I described one with the password leaked, but you can also detect, for example, if a user tries to connect from an anonymous IP, you could say that this is a potential malware, or that you don't trust this because it comes from Tor, for example. So this also could be used as a signal. And also we can use known IPs that we know are from malware. And if you detect that, then again, then you will say that the signing is risky. And then you can choose what you want to do with this information. For example, if you know that there is a high risk, you will directly require the password change for this user. And if there is no password change, then you will not allow or grant the access. And you can also, for example, require MFA only if you find out there is a medium or high risk, or you can check that all the users will have MFA. That's a lot of different options that we have. So the second one is using the location signals that we discussed. So one of the good example is that we could say everyone coming from Switzerland can access your data, and the rest of the world can't access anything. And you can also say only people coming from Switzerland can access corporate data, but if they come from the world, they have to use MFA. So again, you can use this location base to select the best way to protect the data. Another thing that we can do with the location is to use the trusted location to protect when you want to register your MFA. So the first time you want to register a phone number or an application token like an authenticator, you can say that it is required that you are inside the trusted location. So it means that all your users, they have to be inside the network to set up this protection, this MFA. And this could be a good way to protect different scenarios. One example is that if a user never set up MFA before and you don't have this protection and the password is stolen, then any hacker could use his own mobile to set up the MFA. But if you have these options enabled, then the MFA can only be registered from a trusted location, and there is normally no way that the hacker is inside the network and in the same time have the password. So it's basically it's defense in depth. Another use case will be to check only compliant device. So a compliant device would be based on the compliance policies that you have defined in Intune or any MDM. For example, we normally use the require of a PIN to unlock the device. Also, we require a device encryption, and we select minimum or maximum OS versions to make sure that there is no risky device that are signing in our network or to the data, because we know that a lot of versions have vulnerabilities, critical vulnerabilities. So we try to stay up to date, and if they are not up to date, then we don't let them enter the data. And you can also check if a device is jailbroken or rooted, which is never a good idea because you don't have a lot of way to know if malware are inside a rooted or jailbroken device. Then what you can also do is require MFA for all admins. So for this, you will use the user groups and say all the admins, or you can also use the directory role. All the administrator, for example, Exchange administrator, password administrator, etc. Those persons will always require MFA to log in. So this way you protect high potential account to be compromised. But you let the other standard accounts to log in with only a password if they want to. Another very important use case that need to be included every time you plan your conditional access is to have emergency account that are never included in your conditional access rules or policies. This will help you to avoid problematic way such as your only admin that have access to the portal is leaving the company, and then nobody else can access the portal and change the rules, or if the admins they lost their MFA device and then they cannot access the management anymore. Those are all problems that needs to be taken care with Microsoft, and it's not easy to change that. So the easiest way to avoid that is to have at least one or two accounts that you remove from all your conditional access policies. So you will exclude them, and then you don't use them for daily basis, but only if needed. Okay, so now how do we plan this? How do we put everything that we saw on paper and in a useful way? So when you try to plan your conditional access, you mainly define a response to an access condition. So do this when this happens. So by using a simple model to plan the different scenarios, you can easily describe all the potential access and all the rules that you want to apply and to use. So for example, you can use simple English to say an access attempt is made to a cloud app. So for example, to Outlook, Exchange Online, by users and groups. So by, for example, admin users. And then you select the conditions. So you will list all the conditions, and you can say if it's an and or an or. So if all the conditions or only one of the conditions apply. So for example, outside of corporate network or device platform, then you do this. So for example, block access. Then you list all the scenarios, and you can make sure that you don't forget anything. Also, something very important when you do that is to have naming standards and naming conventions that helps the admins to describe and to find what is going on in a conditional access. Because if you try to do it without a good naming conventions, then it's really complex for the admins to find out how does the rules work. You have to open every one of them, and you have to take care of how does the first one affects the others, and it can be very difficult. So by applying always a sequence number, the cloud app it applies to, the response, who it applies to, and when it applies, you will have an easy to understand naming conventions. For example, the sequence number, so CA01, dynamic CRP, so the cloud app, the response, so require MFA for marketing when on external networks. So by using this, it's pretty clear what the conditional access rules does. Also, when you have to plan the conditional access policies, we always try to start by testing it. because it can easily block everyone from outside from the company to access the data. So you need to be careful with that. So we recommend to use test users to create the test plan. Then when you configure the policies, you can use report only, so they will not apply, they will not be enforced, but they will show you what would happen if you apply them and enforce them. So that's very useful to test it first. And also, you can always use a tool that will evaluate simulated signing. So you can configure the testing tool to say, I have a user coming from this IP with this device, trying to access these apps. And you can say, what if? And they will show you all the conditional access rules that will apply to this user. So this can be a good way to test your policy before applying to production. And the cleanup is also very important, because when you do a lot of rules, then you need to make sure that they are up to date, and the cleanup is very important. So I talked to you about the test plan, and the good way to do the test plan is basically to, again, put on paper everything that will be possible to, so all the scenarios that can happen. So for example, you have the policy require MFA when not at work. So this is one of your rules. So you can describe all the potential scenarios. So the first one would be that an authorized user signs into the app while on a trusted location, so at work. And the second scenario would be that an unauthorized user signs into the app while not on a trusted location. So by using these explicit scenarios where all the cases are tested, you can say, yeah, we expect this result. So user should not be prompted MFA, or in the other case, the user should be prompted MFA. And you can easily test the result and compare. And by this way, you can make sure that you don't forget anything and that you don't have unexpected result. So one of the good things to avoid is to use only OS information restrictions, because there you can, in your conditions, say we apply only the restrictions, for example, for iOS or Android. But by doing that, you are only protecting a little bit. So you should not only rely on that, because it can easily be bypassed by, for example, switching user agent. So we should always make sure that we apply those policies for registered device and check if they are compliant or not, instead of just the user agent. And also, if you want to use those device platform filter, make sure that you also include unknown parse platforms. So make sure to do some whitelisting and not blacklisting. Also, something that should be something that should be avoided is to enforce MFA for all the users, because as I told you, if you do that, you can block your admin portal, and you will not be able to change the rules anymore if you lose the device that are the MFA accounts. So please refer to the break glass accounts and make sure you have them. And also be careful when you use the all users selections. Note that the guests are also targeted. And you can always exclude the accounts from the policies in the setting. And finally, if you don't use the all users, and if you use accounts or user groups that you exclude from all the policies, don't forget to monitor them. So you should always use this monitoring solutions. But basically, in Azure, you have the AAD signings and audit logs possibility, or the Azure Log Analytics that can help you. Otherwise, you can use third party also. But it's important to not forget about them and to verify what is happening with those accounts. So if something happens to it, you will be notified. And finally, we always recommend to follow a custom strategy, because you can find a lot of best practice which are very good and you need to follow them. But every company has differences, and you need to find the best custom fit strategy for this. So you always need to check the balance between security and usability, because if you block everything and if you apply the most secure possible settings and the users, they don't accept it, and you have a lot of attention because of that, it could be problematic. So we always recommend to find the best balance, and if you don't have a way to make it easy for the users, to raise awareness also and explain to them why do they need now to include an MFA instead of just a username and password, and why it's important that you secure this access. And we always suggest to raise awareness and to open the discussion with the users. And voila, I'm done. So if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
I did not receive any questions so far through the chat.
Well, I guess it was clear then. Good news.
Exactly. As there are no further questions, we will end the webinar at this point. If you have any further questions later on this topic, please contact Nomasis at any time. Thank you all for joining and have a nice evening.